All right. So this week, John is out of town, and so we're not doing a reading from Rules for Radicals. We'll pick that up this coming next week, whether it be on Sunday or Monday. We'll figure it out. But he's he's out hanging with the wife and the kid. So we are going to do something that I have been looking at doing for probably about a month or so. We're going to talk about Christianity and political ideology. Specifically, we're going to dive into a writing by Saint Hilarion Troitsky on Christianity and socialism. He lived during the Soviet Union. We'll get into his biography and his writing on Christianity versus socialism. But before we did that, I just kind of wanted to make a point that all ideologies, all political ideologies fall short of Christianity. They all borrow ideas from Christianity, but they all fall short of Christianity in one way, shape, or form. Um, Whether it be Zionism, which has completely disfigured the idea of Israel being not only those that God chose, but those that chose God. If you look at the story of the formation of the tribes of Israel, God came to them and said, "Look, put the blood of the lamb on your doorpost to show that you are of this tribe." And so then you had blood representing his people, and then those people set up. They left Egypt, and not all of them were related. Not all some of them were ethnically Egyptian that put the blood on their doorpost. But these people that chose to do this, to chose to listen to God, that chose to follow the commandment of God, they became Israel. And then in order to be Israeli, after this, you celebrated the Passover. That's what made you Israeli. That's what made you part of Israel was the celebration of the Passover. And now that the scriptures have been fulfilled in Christ, what makes you the tribe of Israel or God's chosen people is to partake of the Eucharist. So the understanding that to be Jewish is a bloodline is a complete modern invention that was never part of the mindset of the day of the beginning of Israel and of the faith. So that's just Zionism. If you want more information, Father John Whiteford does a really good job. He's been on Counterflow talking about this. He's been on my podcast talking about this. We've done a couple of shows together on this, but I'm just kind of giving like a little kind of summary from my miniature layman perspective. I am not a teacher. I am just laity that has a podcast and talks about what I see and what I think should be talked about. I'm not any authority whatsoever. It would be much better for you to go listen to Father John Whiteford or Father Josiah Trenum or even obviously Father Turbo, who could get much more into detail on the the idea that where this all went off the rails in the what 19th century, early 20th century, whatever it is. Um, but then you look at libertarianism, And the point of libertarianism is liberty, is freedom. So much of our world today is locked up in the materialist idea of tyranny and liberty that a lot of people fail to realize that when you go like Walter Block's route of defending the indefensible, as he his book was titled, and you start defending prostitution, debauchery, drug addiction, drug use, and all these, gambling, these things that can ruin your life. And you're advocating for people to have the freedom to go and ruin their life. They don't need permission to go ruin their life. People still do it, despite it being against the law. They're going to continue, they continue to do it. So going out there and defending people's lifestyles that lead them down a path of destruction is not love for that person. It is not in any way advocating for their liberty because they are slaves to these passions, whether it be drugs or sex. And true liberty is, yes, the freedom in the material world to live without tyranny striking you down. But it's also spiritually without completely being a slave to self-destructive behavior. And I'm reading Saint Silouan the Athonite. This is the second time I'm reading through the life of Saint Silouan, and 4 years into Orthodoxy, I'm getting much more out of it. Look at the sweat; it's hot outside. Um, I'm getting a lot more out of this book than I did the first time I read it. But I just wanted to read this little section. Just a couple of paragraphs, and it's talking about a young man that comes to him discussing liberty from a political standpoint. One day, the Storets had a conversation with a young student visiting Mount Athos, who talked a great deal about freedom. As always, he listened gently to the ideas and experiences of his lively, nice but naive visitor. Naturally, the latter's conception of freedom meant political freedom on the one part, and for the other, being able to follow the dictates of one's heart. In reply, the Starets explained his own ideas and aims. Who doesn't want freedom? He said. Everyone does, but few know what freedom consists of and how to attain it. To become free, one must first of all bind oneself. The more you bind yourself, the more freedom your spirit will know. One must pinion the passions in oneself so that they don't get possession of you. Restrain yourself so as not to harm your neighbor. People generally seek freedom in order to do what they like, but that is not freedom, but the power of sin over you. Freedom to fornicate, overeat, and get drunk, or be spiteful, use violence, and kill, and so on, is certainly not freedom, but as the Lord said, whosoever committeth sin is the servant of sin. One must pray hard to be delivered from such bondage. We believe that true freedom means not sinning in order to love God and one's neighbor with our whole heart and our whole strength. True freedom means constant dwelling in God. Though what the Storet said was too profound for the youth to grasp, though what he said was apparently very simple, the young student left deeply impressed. And that's just one aspect of how to look at it. As Tucker Carlson constantly says that the government is here to serve the people. And if the government is out there pushing pornography and drugs and chemicals in your foods, they're not caring for you. They hate you. They waste your money on wars overseas, on the murder of innocent people in nations around the world. And they don't do it because they care for you. They do it because they only care about their own power, their own influence, and their own wealth. They don't care about you at all. They care only about their own ends. And your means is just a way for them to get there. We're going to share the screen. Let's see. It's just share sound, but okay. So let's pull this up. Okay. So let's get into the life of Holy Hieromartyr Hilarion Troitsky, Archbishop of Veray. I think it's Veray. One of the most eminent figures of the Russian Orthodox Church in the 1920s was Archbishop Hilarion Veray of Veray, an outstanding theologian and extremely talented individual. Throughout his life, he burned with great love for the Church of Christ, right up to his martyric death for her sake. His literary works are distinguished by their strictly ecclesiastical content and his tireless struggle against scholasticism, specifically Latinism, which had been influencing the Russian church from the time of Metropolitan Peter Mogila of Kiev. His ideal was ecclesiastical purity for theological schools and theological studies. His continual reminder was there is no salvation outside the church, and there is no sacraments outside the church. Archbishop Hilarion Vladimir Alexievich Troitsky in the world was born on September 13th, 1886, to a priest family in the village of Lipitsa in the Kashira district of Tula province. Just as a warning, I have read this once before, but I have never pronounced many of these words out loud. So a longing to learn was awakened in him at an early age. When he was only 5 years old, he took his 3-year-old brother by the hand and left his native village for Moscow to go to school. When his little brother began to cry from fatigue, Vladimir said to him, "Well, then remain uneducated." Their parents realized in time that their children had disappeared and quickly brought them home. Vladimir was soon sent to theology school and then to seminary. After completing the full seminary course, he entered the Moscow Theological Academy and graduated with honors in 1910 with a candidate degree in theology. He remained at the academy with a professorial scholarship. It is worth noting that Vladimir was an excellent student from the beginning of theology school to the completion of the theological academy. He always earned the highest marks in all subjects. In 1913, Vladimir received his master's degree in theology for his fundamental work, An Overview of the History of the Dogma of the Church, which I have sitting right there. I haven't read it, but I have it. His heart burned with the desire to serve God as a monastic. On March 28, 1913, in the skete of the Paraclete of the Holy Trinity, St. Sergius Lavra, he received the monastic tonsure with the name Hilarion in honor of Saint Hilarion the New, abbot and confessor of Pelicete, commemorated March 28th. About 2 months later, on June 2nd, he was ordained a hieromonk, and on June 5th of the same year, raised to the rank of archimandrite. On May 30th, 1913, Father Hilarion was appointed inspector of the Moscow Theological Academy. In December of 1913, Archimandrite Hilarion was confirmed as professor of Holy Scripture in the New Testament. Archimandrite Hilarion gained great authority both as an educator of those studying in the theological school and as a professor of theology, and his sermons earned him great renown. His dogmatic theological works came out one after another, enriching ecclesiastical scholarship. His sermons sounded from church ambos like the ringing of bells, calling God's people to faith and moral renewal. When the question arose as to whether the Russian church should restore the patriarchate as a member of the All-Russian Local Council of 1917 to 1918, he made an inspired stand in favor of the patriarchate. He said, "The Russian church has never been without a chief hierarch. Our patriarchate was destroyed by Peter the First. With whom did it interfere? With the conciliarity of the church? But wasn't it during the time of the patriarchs that there were especially many councils? No, the patriarchate interfered neither with conciliarity nor with the church. Then with whom? Here before me are two great friends, two adornments of the 17th century, Patriarch Nikon and Tsar Alexei Mikhailovich. In order to sow disagreement between these two friends, evil boyars whispered to the Tsar, because of the Patriarch, you, the sovereign, have become invisible. When Nikon left the Moscow throne, he wrote, let the sovereign have more space without me. Peter gave flesh to this thought of Nikon's when he destroyed the patriarchate. Let me, the sovereign, have more space without the patriarch. But church consciousness in the 34th Apostolic Canon, as well as in the local council held in Moscow in 1917, says one irrevocable thing. The bishops of any nation, including the Russian nation, must know who is the first among them and acknowledge him as their head. And I would like to address all those who, for some reason, still consider it necessary to protest against the patriarchate. Fathers and brothers, do not disrupt the joy of our oneness of mind. Why do you take this thankless task upon yourselves? Why do you make hopeless speeches? You are fighting against the church's consciousness. Have some fear, lest haply you begin to fight against God. We have already sinned in that we didn't restore the patriarchate 2 months ago when we all came to Moscow and met with each other for the first time in the great Dormition Cathedral. Was it not painful to the point of tears to see the empty patriarchal seat? And when we venerated the holy relics of the wonder workers of Moscow and chief hierarchs of Russia, did we not hear their reproach that for 200 years their chief hierarchical throne has remained desolate? Immediately after the Bolsheviks came to power, they began to persecute the church. And by March of 1919, Archimandrite Hilarion had already been arrested. His first imprisonment lasted 3 months. On May 24th, 1920, Archimandrite Hilarion was elected and on the next day consecrated as Bishop of Veray, a vicariate of the Moscow diocese. If you're reading this along with me, the reason it says May 11th/24 is because of the multiple calendars in the Orthodox tradition. His contemporaries painted a colorful picture of him, young, full of cheerfulness, well educated, an excellent preacher, orator, singer, and a brilliant polemicist, always natural, sincere, and open. He was physically very strong, tall, and broad shouldered, with thick reddish hair and a clear, bright face. He was the people's favorite. Bishop Hilarion enjoyed great authority among the clergy and his fellow bishops, who called him Hilarion the Great, for his mind and steadfastness in the faith. His episcopal service was a path of the cross. 2 years had not passed since the day of his consecration, before he was already in vial in Arkhangelsk. He was already in exile in Archangelsk. I don't know how to say that. I'm trying. Archangelsk. Bishop Hilarion was away from church life for a whole year. He continued his activity upon his return from exile. His Holiness Patriarch Tikhon took a close interest in him and made him, along with Archbishop Seraphim, his closest like-minded advisor. The Patriarch raised Bishop Hilarion to the rank of Archbishop immediately upon his return from exile. His ecclesiastical activities began to broaden. He carried on serious talks with Tuchkov on the need to order life in the Russian Orthodox Church on the basis of canonical law amidst the conditions present under the Soviet government. And he labored to restore ecclesiastical organization, composing a number of patriarchal epistles. He became a threat to the renovationists and was inseparable from Patriarch Tikhon in their eyes. On the evening of June 22nd, 1923, Vladika Hilarion served an all-night vigil for the feast of the Vladimir icon of the Mother of God at the Sretinsky Monastery, which had been taken over by the rite of consecration, and thus returned the monastery to the church. The next day, Patriarch Tikhon served in the monastery. The divine services lasted all day, not ending until 6 p.m. Patriarch Tikhon appointed Archbishop Hilarion as superior of Sretinsky Monastery. The Renovationist leader, Metropolitan Antonin, wrote against the Patriarch and Archbishop Hilarion with inexpressible hatred, accusing them unceremoniously as counter revolutionaries. Tikhon and Hilarion, he wrote, have produced grace filled, suffocating gases against the revolution, and the revolution has armed itself not only against the Tikhonites, but against the whole church, as against a band of conspirators. Hilarion goes around sprinkling churches after the renovationists. He walks brazenly into these churches. Tikhon and Hilarion are guilty before the revolution, vexers of the church of God, and can offer no good deeds to excuse themselves. Archbishop Hilarion clearly understood the renovationists' lawlessness, and he conducted heated debates in Moscow with Alexander Vedinsky. As Archbishop as Archbishop Hilarion himself expressed it, he had Vedinsky up against the wall at these debates and exposed all his cunning and lies. The Renovationist bosses sensed that Archbishop Hilarion interfered with their doings, and they therefore exerted all efforts to deprive him of his freedom. In December 1923, Archbishop Hilarion was sentenced to 3 years in prison. He was taken to the prison camp in Kim and then to Solovki. When the archbishop saw the horrific conditions in the barracks and the camp food, he said, "We won't get out of here alive." Archbishop Hilarion had embarked upon the path of the cross, which culminated in his blessed repose. Archbishop Hilarion's path of the cross is of great interest to us, for in it is revealed the full magnificence of spirit of this martyr for Christ. Therefore, we will allow ourselves to take a more detailed look at this period in his life. Living in Solovki, Archbishop Hilarion preserved all those good qualities of soul that he had gained through his ascetic labors, both before and during his monastic life and as a priest and hierarch. Those who lived with him during those years were witnesses to his total monastic non-acquisitiveness, deep simplicity, true humility, and childlike meekness. He simply gave away everything he had when asked. He took no interest in his own things. That is why he needed someone to watch after his suitcase out of mercy for him. He did have such an assistant at Solovki. Archbishop Hilarion could be insulted, but he would never answer back. He might not even notice the attempt to insult him. He was always cheerful, and even if he was worried or distressed, he always tried to cover it up quickly with his cheerfulness. He looked at everything with spiritual eyes, and everything served for his spiritual profit. At the Filomenov fishery, one eyewitness related 4.5 miles from the Solovki Kremlin and main camp on the shores of the small White Sea Bay, Archbishop Hilarion and I, along with 2 other bishops and a few priests, were net makers and fishermen. Archbishop Hilarion loved to talk about this work of ours using a rearrangement of the words of the Sticheron for Pentecost. All things are given by the Holy Spirit. Before fishermen became theologians, and now it's the opposite. Theologians have become fishermen. Thus did he humble himself before his new lot. His good spirits extended also to the Soviet authorities themselves, and he was able to view even them with guileless eyes. Once a young hieromonk was brought to Solovki from Kazan. He had been sentenced to 3 years of exile for removing the orarion from a renovationist deacon and not allowing the deacon to celebrate with him. The archbishop approved of the hieromonk's action and joked about the various prison terms given to one or another person, having nothing to do with the seriousness of their crime. For the master is gracious and receives the last, even as the first, he said in the words of St. John Chrysostom's Paschal homily. He gives rest to him that comes at the 11th hour, just as to him who has labored from the first. He has mercy upon the last and cares for the first. To the one he gives, and to the other he is gracious. He both honors the work and praises the intention. These words may have sounded ironic, but they imparted a feeling of peace and made the hieromonk accept the trial as from God's hands. Vladika Hilarion was greatly cheered by the thought of Solovki, the thought that Solovki was a school of the virtues, not acquisitiveness, meekness, humility, temperance, patience, and love of labor. One day, a group of clergy was robbed upon arrival, and the fathers were very upset. One of the prisoners said to them in jest that this is how they were being taught non acquisitiveness. Vladika was elated by that remark. One exile lost his boots twice in a row and walked around the camp in torn galoshes. Archbishop Hilarion was brought to unfeigned merriness looking at him, and that is how he encouraged good humor in the other prisoners. His love for every person, his attention to each one, and his sociability were simply amazing. He was the most popular individual in the camp among all of its societal classes. We are saying not only that the general, the officer, the student, and the professor knew him and talked with him, in spite of the fact that there were many bishops there, even older and no less educated than he, but also the rabble, the criminal society of thieves and bandits, knew him as a good, respected person whom it was impossible not to love. Whether during work breaks or during his free time, he could be seen walking around arm in arm with one or another example of this crowd. This was not just condescension toward a younger brother or a fallen man. No. Vladika act, Vladika spoke with each one as an equal, taking an interest in, for example, the profession or favorite activity of each of them. The criminal element is very proud and sensitively conceited. They cannot be slighted with impunity. Therefore, Vladika's manner overcame everything. Like a friend to them, he ennobled them by his presence and attention. It was exceptionally interesting to observe him in that crowd, talking things over with them. He was accessible to all. He was just like everyone, and it was easy to be around him, to meet with him and talk. The most ordinary, simple, and non-saintly exterior, that was Vladika. However, behind this ordinary exterior of joy and seeming worldliness, one could gradually begin to see childlike purity, vast spiritual experience, kindness and mercy. His sweet indifference to material goods, his true faith, authentic piety, and lofty moral perfection, not to mention intellectual strength combined with strength and clarity of conviction. This appearance of ordinary sinfulness, foolishness for Christ, and a mask of worldliness hid his inner activity from people and preserved him from hypocrisy and conceit. He was the sworn enemy of hypocrisy and all manner of pious appearance, and was absolutely conscious and direct. In the Troitsky crew, that is what they called Archbishop Hilarion's work group, the clergy received a good education on Solovki. Everyone understood that there was no point in just calling yourself a sinner, carrying on long, pious conversations, or showing how austerely you lived. It was especially useless to think more highly of yourself than was actually the case. Vladika would ask every arriving priest in detail about the events leading up to his imprisonment. One day, a certain abbot was brought to Solovki. The archbishop asked him, "What did they arrest you for?" "Oh, I served Mulbins at home after they closed the monastery," the abbot replied. "Well, people would gather, and there were even some healings." "Ah, well, even healings? How much Solovki did they give you?" 3 years. "Well," said Vladika, "that's not much. For healings, they should have given you more. The Soviet government made an oversight." It goes without saying that it was more than immodest to speak about healings coming through one's own prayers. In midsummer of 1925, Archbishop Hilarion was sent to the prison of Yaroslavl. There it was very different from Solovki. He had special privileges there. He was allowed to receive spiritual books. Taking advantage of these privileges, Archbishop Hilarion read a great deal of patristic literature and kept notes, which resulted in many thick notebooks of patristic instruction. He was able to send these notebooks to his friends for safekeeping after passing the prison censor. The hierarch would secretly visit the prison warden, who was a kind man, and as a result, he made an underground collection of religious manuscripts and Soviet literature, as well as copies of various church administrative documents and correspondence with bishops. During that time, Archbishop Hilarion also courageously bore a slew of troubles. When he was in Yaroslavl prison, the Georgian schism was occurring within the Russian church's bosom. An agent from the GPU came to him since he was a popular bishop and tried to persuade him to join the new schism. Moscow loves you. Moscow is waiting for you, the agent said to him. But Archbishop Hilarion remained steadfast. He could see what the GPU was trying to do, and he courageously rejected the sweet freedom offered him in exchange for his betrayal. The agent was amazed at his courage and said, "It's nice to speak with such an intelligent man." Then he added, "How long is your term on Solovki?" 3 years? For Hilarion, only 3 years? So little? It is not surprising that 3 more years were added to Archbishop Hilarion's sentence after this. The statement for spreading government secrets was also added. That is, for talking about his conversation with the agent in the Yaroslav prison. In the spring of 1926, Archbishop Hilarion was sent back to Solovki. His way of the cross continued. The Gregorians did not leave him in peace. They did not lose hope that they might be able to win such an eminent hierarch as Archbishop Hilarion over to their side and thus strengthen their position. In early June of 1927, when the White Sea had only just become passable, Archbishop Hilarion was transferred to Moscow for discussions with Archbishop Gregory. In the presence of various secular personages, the latter insistently requested Archbishop Hilarion to gather courage and head the Gregorian Supreme Church Council, which was rapidly losing its significance. Archbishop Hilarion categorically refused, explaining that the actions of this council were unjust and a waste of time, contrived by people who knew neither church life nor canons, and therefore the council was doomed to failure. Moreover, Archbishop Hilarion counseled Archbishop Gregory as a brother to abandon his plans, which were unnecessary and even harmful to the church. Such meetings were repeated several times. They begged Vladika Hilarion, promised him total freedom of action and a white klobuk, but he firmly held to his convictions. There are even rumors that he said to someone at one of these meetings, "Although I'm an archpastor, I am a hot tempered man, and I urge you to leave. After all, I might lose my self control. I would sooner rot in prison than change my position," he said once to Bishop Gervasius. He stuck to this position on the Gregorians to the end of his life. During the troubled times when, after the Renovationist schism, disagreements had penetrated into the midst of the exiled bishops of Solovki, Archbishop Hilarion was a true peacemaker among them. He was able to unify them on the basis of Orthodox principles. Archbishop Hilarion was one of the bishops who worked on the Church Declaration of 1926, which determined the position of the Orthodox Church under the new historical conditions. This declaration played an enormous role in the struggle with emerging divisions. In November 1927, certain of the Solovki bishops began to waver over the Josephite schism. Archbishop Hilarion was able to gather up to 15 bishops in the cell of Archimandrite Theophan, where all unanimously, goodness, my nose is starting to itch, resolved to preserve faithfulness to the Orthodox Church headed by Metropolitan Sergius. "No schisms," Archbishop Hilarion proclaimed. "No matter what they say to us, we will look at it as a provocation." On June 28, 1928, Vladika Hilarion wrote to his close friends that he was unsympathetic in the extreme with those who had broken off and considered their actions unfounded, foolish, and extremely harmful. He considered such separation to be an ecclesiastical crime, quite serious under the current conditions. "I see absolutely nothing in the actions of Metropolitan Sergius and his synod that would exceed a measure of condescension and patience," he said. Archbishop Hilarion worked very hard to convince Bishop Victor of Glazov, who was very closely aligned with the Josephites. He finally did manage to convince Bishop Victor, and not only did the latter recognize that he was wrong, he even wrote a letter to his flock enjoining them to cease their separations. Although Archbishop Hilarion was unable to know everything about the life in the church of that time, he nevertheless was not an indifferent observer of the various ecclesiastical disturbances and catastrophes that were crashing down upon the Orthodox people. People came to him for advice and asked him what they should do to attain peace in the church under the new conditions of political life. This was a very complicated question, and Archbishop Hilarion provided an exceedingly deep and well analyzed answer based upon Orthodox canons and ecclesiastical practice. Here is what he wrote about this in a letter dated December 10th, 1927. I have not participated for the last 2 years in church life. I have only periodic and perhaps inexact information. Therefore, it is difficult for me to judge about the particulars and details of that life. But I think that the general line of church life and its inadequacies and illnesses are known to me. The main inadequacy, one which I felt even earlier, is the lack of church councils since 1917. That is, during the very time when they have been most needed, because the Russian church has entered into entirely new historical conditions, not without God's will. These conditions are unusual and significantly different from its earlier conditions. Ecclesiastical practice, including the formation of the councils of 1917 to 1918, is not suited to these new conditions. The situation has become significantly more complicated since the death of Patriarch Tikhon. The question of the locum tenens, as far as I know, is also very confused, and ecclesiastical governance is in a state of total disarray. I do not know if there is anyone among our hierarchy, or even among conscious members of the church in general, who are so naive or nearsighted as to entertain the absurd illusion that the Soviet government will soon be overthrown and the old order restored, etc. But I think that all who desire the good of the church recognize the need for the Russian church to make a place for itself under the new historical conditions. Thus, a council is needed, and first of all, we need to ask the governmental authorities to allow us to call a council. However, someone needs to gather the council, make the necessary preparations, in a word, lead the church up to a council. Therefore, right now, before the council, an ecclesiastical body is needed. I have a series of requirements for the organization and the activity of this body, which I think are common to everyone who wants good ecclesiastical order rather than disturbance of peace or some new confusion. I will point out a few of these requirements. One, a temporary ecclesiastical body should not be essentially self willed. That is, it should have the agreement of the locum tenens from the start. As much as possible, the temporary ecclesiastical body should include those who have been delegated by the locum tenens, Metropolitan Peter, or the Holy Patriarch. Three, the temporary ecclesiastical body should unite and not separate the episcopate. It is not a judge and not a punisher of dissenters. That is what the council will be. Four, the temporary ecclesiastical body should see its task as modest and practical, the creation of a council. The last 2 points require particular explanation. The repulsive ghost of the 1922 VTSU Supreme Church Administration still hovers over the hierarchy and ecclesiastical personages. Church people have become suspicious. The temporary ecclesiastical body should fear, like fire, the least resemblance in activity to the criminal activity of the VTSU. Otherwise, there will only be new confusion. The VTSU was begun with lies and deceit. Everything should be founded upon the truth. The VTSU, an entirely self appointed body, proclaimed itself as the supreme master of the destiny of the Russian church, a master to whom ecclesiastical laws and even common divine and human laws do not necessarily apply. Our ecclesiastical body will only be temporary, with the sole task of calling a council. The VTSU persecuted all who would not submit to it, that is, all dissent hierarchs and other ecclesiastical workers, threatening punishments left and right and promising mercy to the submissive. The VTSU evoked the censure of the government, censure that the government itself hardly found desirable. This repugnant side of the criminal activities of the VTSU and its successor, the so called Synod, with its councils of 1923 to 1925, earned them deserved contempt, caused great woe and suffering for innocent people, brought only evil, and had only the result that a part of the hierarchy and some irresponsible church people left the church and formed schismatic groups. Nothing of the kind, not even the slightest hint, should be present in the activities of the temporary ecclesiastical body. I emphasize this thought especially because I see a very great danger in precisely this. Our ecclesiastical body should convoke a council. With respect to this council, the following requirements are necessary. 5. The temporary ecclesiastical organ should convoke but not select the members of the council, as was done by the VTSU of woeful memory in 1923. A selected council will not have any authority and will bring not calm, but only new confusion to the church. There is scant need to enlarge the list of robber councils in history. 3 are enough. Ephesus in 449 and 2 in Moscow between 1923 and 1925. My first wish for the future council is that it would prove its total non-participation and non-solidarity with all politically suspect movements, to disperse the fog of unconscionable and foul-smelling slander which has shrouded the Russian church through the criminal efforts of evildoers. Only a true council can have authority, bring calm into church life, and give peace to the tormented hearts of church people. I believe that at the council, the whole importance of this ecclesiastical moment will come to surface, and it will order church life in a way that corresponds to new conditions. Excuse me. As Archbishop Hilarion thought and confirmed, only if there was church subornus conciliarity could there be pacification, and could the Russian Orthodox Church conduct its normal activities within the new conditions of the Soviet state. His way of the cross was coming to its completion. In December 1929, Archbishop Hilarion was sent to live in Alma Ata in Central Asia for a term of 3 years. He traveled under guard from one prison to another. He was robbed along the way, and when he arrived in Leningrad, he was in a long shirt, swarming with parasites, and was already sick. He wrote from the Leningrad prison where he had been placed, "I am seriously ill with louse-borne typhus and am lying in a prison hospital. I was most likely infected on the road. On Saturday, December 28th, my fate will be decided. The crisis of the illness. I am unlikely to survive." In the hospital, he was told that he needed to be shaved, to which His Eminence replied, "Do what you want with me." In his delirium, he said, "Now I am completely free. No one can take me." The angel of death already stood by the head of the sufferer. A few minutes before he died, a doctor came up to him and said that the crisis was over and he might recover. Archbishop Hilarion said in a barely audible whisper, "How good. Now we're far from." With these words, the confessor of Christ died. This was on December 28, 1929. Metropolitan Seraphim, who occupied the Leningrad See at the time, obtained permission to take his body for burial. They brought white hierarchical vestments and a white mitre to the hospital. They vested him and took him to the church of the Novodevichi Monastery in Leningrad. Vladika had changed terribly. In the coffin lay a pitiful, shaven, gray old man. When one of his relatives saw him in the coffin, she fainted. He was so unlike the former Hilarion. He was buried in the Novodevichi Monastery Cemetery, not far from the graves of the relatives of then Archbishop, later Patriarch Alexei. Besides Metropolitan Seraphim and Archbishop Alexei, Bishop Ambrose of Luga, Bishop Sergius of Lodano, Pali, and 3 other bishops participated in the burial. Thus the spiritual and physical giant departed to eternity, a man of wondrous soul, gifted by the Lord with outstanding theological talents, who laid down his life for the church. His death was an enormous loss for the Russian Orthodox Church. May your memory be eternal, holy Hieromark Hilarion. Okay. So that's who wrote this essay on Christianity and socialism that we are about to dive into. Um, this was a pamphlet Saint Hilarion published in the intervening years between the failed 1905 revolution and the unhappy 1917 revolution. So, excuse me. So he was fighting against the ideas of socialism long before the Bolsheviks actually took control of the Soviet Union. Men verily swear by the greater. Hebrews 6:16. This truth remains ever and everywhere immutable. Any single truth or any series of truths always comprise what is greater. Let's see if I can. No. For man, and this greater is man's authority. He refers to it, he swears by it. Yet the same truths are not what is greater for all men. Sometimes what is greater is entirely false, yet man nevertheless swears by this illusory truth as though it were authoritative. The measures by which men approach the phenomena of the life which surrounds us are quite varied. Each chooses that authority which seems best to him, and therefore one may accept the position. Tell me what your authorities are, and I will say what sort of man you are. In the past, men were different, and their authorities were also different. The Word of God, the laws of the church. In the past, these were the eternally immutable and perfect authorities understood and held dear equally by all. If something were in accordance with the Word of God, with the laws of the church, it was good. If something were not in accordance with them or contradicted them, it could not be good. Pasashkov, IT Pasashkov. These I have never said these names out loud. I am so sorry, guys. IT Pasashkov wrote his A Father's Testament precisely to corroborate the divine scriptures. There he states with certainty, all of us who live in the Orthodox faith know this well, that all truth is contained in the words of the Lord. And to his son he says, my son, I firmly exhort and adjure thee, that with all thy strength thou hold fast to the holy Eastern Church as the mother who gave thee birth, and that thou cut off from thyself all who oppose the holy church, and have no amicable relations with them of any sort, for they are the enemies of God. Now, many have quite different and even contradictory authorities. Truly, where now can one find in the progressive press any reference to God and the church? Is not agreement with the laws of God and the church of Christ now considered the hallmark of what is bad, of backwardness, while opposition to them is considered a sign of what is good? I recall a certain student at the Theological Academy, alas, who, seeing a man with whom he was unacquainted eating fasting food, said he is probably one of those who participates in the pogroms. Another student, when I praised the Theological Academy in his presence, enumerating its good qualities, quite seriously interrupted me, saying, no, tell me, what has your academy done for the revolution? I decline to enumerate such dubious merits, yet such a statement is entirely characteristic of our times. Now it is not with Now it is not what is pleasing to God or the church that is good, but what is progressive, liberal, revolutionary. That which is right leaning is the concatenation of all evils. Conca- concatenation of all evils. Okay. It is in agreement with Marx. This is the highest praise for any teaching, for any opinion. Even holy Christian doctrine is assessed on the basis of this new standard. Thus, all of Christianity's fundamental teaching concerning the personal struggle of repentance and humility is cast aside, while only some sort of social teaching is taken up and given consideration, and in it only that which one can reinterpret in a liberal revolutionary way is approved. Those who wrote and labored in the church, even the great holy fathers, are assessed using the same debased inferior coinage. We ourselves were witness to how a certain orator delivering a panegyric to St. John Chrysostom on November 13th, 1907, declared that the great hierarch thought like Marx on some things, though not as well. Such we dare to say, blasphemy is now troubling to very few. In life, some new world view is urgently announcing itself. New gods, new idols are being erected. Of course, the Church of Christ is holy and without blemish. The people of the church continue to live in accordance with the divine laws of the past, refusing to bend their knee before Baal. Before them, before for them there is no other god than God and his Christ. There is no authority besides the authority of the church. However, there are no few people who have already adopted the new worldview, who have already bowed down before the new idols, yet nevertheless have not for some reason left the church entirely. Such people are constantly passing judgment on Christianity, on the church. They pass judgment not as ones taught by the church, but as ones who would teach it. They wish to correct the church's understanding of Christianity, replacing it with their own, in which the teaching of Christ is shown to bear a remarkable resemblance to all the most recent teachings and actions of the godless, up to and including revolutions, expropriations, and bombings. On the basis of such interpretations of Christianity, in renunciation of the authority of church, there have appeared a Christian brotherhood of struggle and a Christian socialism, and who knows whether there will appear at some point Christian brigandage, etc., etc. Eras of decline are always characterized by the absence of oh, definite, sorry, absence of definite, clearly expressed convictions. Men become, as it were, impotent. Their laziness does not allow them to think a thought through to the end. And for this reason, the most contradictory elements, taken from various sources, peacefully coexist within their worldview. Such is the nature of eclecticism. Our times may serve as an illustration of this. Do not many now desire to bring together in unity the most impossible things? There are far too many who share such a desire in our days. One of the more prominent misunderstandings which have arisen in this area is the misunderstanding about socialism. On the one hand, av- aver they aver that Christ was a socialist. And on the other hand, that socialism is entirely in agreement with Christianity. This implies that in all these discussions, Christianity is not taken to be the only possible indefinite form of the Holy Church of Christ. The Holy Church is mindlessly disparaged as official, the one with which put itself at the service of the old regime. Everyone interprets Christianity as he pleases, and only a small part of its sacred books is given any attention. The epistles of Paul are rejected. No one knows them. Even from the Gospels, only that which is appropriate is selected. The expulsion of the merchants from the temple as proof of the lawfulness and necessity of violence, though, of course, only revolutionary violence, with such devices, it is not difficult to demonstrate whatever one pleases, and not only some agreement between Christianity and socialism. In light publicists' literature, one may constantly encounter attempts to reconcile pagan socialism and Christianity. It is sufficient merely to socialize Christianity and to Christianize socialism, and lo, Christian socialism is the result. Therefore, any attempt to investigate, from a strictly Christian point of view, the question of whether socialism is appropriate for Christians or is our adversary can only be welcome. One can especially welcome a serious and fundamental attempt. Such an attempt, which stands alone and prominent among the mass of others, which are not well founded and are lacking in seriousness, has been provided by V.A. Kozhnevnikov in his remarkable brochure, The Relationship of Socialism to Religion in General and to Christianity in Particular. It is not surprising that the author has provided an especially well founded and unintentionally persuasive resolution of each question. The author knows socialism from its very sources, far better than the majority of our woeful socialists. The author speaks exclusively using the words of socialist literature and provides such an overwhelming vast quantity of this literature that only bad faith will not believe him, will not be persuaded by his arguments. We highly recommend to each person who desires to be ready to give a well founded answer to anyone who asks about Christianity and socialism that he not only familiarize himself with Mr. Kozhevnikov's brochure, but keep it constantly at hand. But since not everyone can familiarize himself with this brochure, we wish, if only in brief, to pass on the results of his investigation. I'm not trying to say his name again. I'm sorry. We ask the reader's pardon only because it is quite impossible to convey all the richness of the contents of this remarkable brochure. Otherwise, we would have to reprint it here in its entirety. He states that, as far as the relationship of socialism to Christianity goes, there is not even partial truth. Here, everything is in content contrary to Christian truths and is in form offensive to Christian sensibilities. In vain do some think that socialism is merely a theory of economics. No, socialism replaces everything with itself. It is founding its own religion. In the resolutions of the various socialist assemblies, in the discourses of socialist leaders, one finds clearly and definitely expressed the demand for a revolution in all human thought. Socialism is not and cannot be a mere economic science, a question concerning the stomach only. In the final analysis, socialists are striving to bring about revolution throughout the entire juridical, moral, philosophical, and religious superstructure. Is socialism merely an economic theory? We read in the socialistic catechism of Bax and Kvelch. In no way. Socialism envelops all the relations of human life. According to Bax, in religion, socialism is expressed as atheistic humanism. If socialism looks upon itself as a worldview, what then is this worldview? It is, first of all, a consistent materialism, a materialistic understanding of history, as acknowledged by the socialists themselves, comprises the essence of the entire theory of their teaching. Its cornerstone, according to the expression of Bernstein, one must seek the basic reasons of all social changes and revolutions, not in the heads of men and not in their views on eternal righteousness and justice, but in changes in the means of production and distribution. If socialism is so closely bound up with materialism, how can it bear any relationship to religion? Crudely distorting the moral and educational significance of religion, the materialistic criticism of Marx and Engels sees religion as the mere handiwork of man, the product of ignorant imagination or profit motives, and God himself as a reflection of economic relations. Even in the Christian God, they dare to see an anthropological idealization of a capitalism which thirsts for power and satisfaction. Religion is called forth, in the words of Engels, by the dark primordial ideas of man concerning his personal nature and that which surrounds him, and is defined in its permutations by class and consequently economic relations. Religion seemed to Marx to be a superstition which has outlived its time, a dead question for the intelligentsia, but an opium for the people. According to this, Marx considered freedom of conscience from the charms of religion to be the assistance of the people toward real happiness. True, there are thinkers who maintain that socialism is not inescapably bound up with materialism, but they are not real socialists. Such thinkers try to impart to socialism a philosophical and ethical, even a Christian coloration. Staudinger tries to convince his brother socialists that the basic ideas of Christ are the same as ours. His ideas of unity is our God. His idea of the existence of this unity is our Christ. And although we denied all dogmas, in principle, our ethics are Christian. Dyed-in-the-wool socialists staunchly refuse to accept the recommended deepening of the bases of socialism, which, in their opinion, is entirely unsuitable for them. Bebel rains down mockery upon the invitation that everyone study and philosophize and work on oneself. Conrad Schmidt distances himself from Kantian humanism. Before in it, there is no agitational power. There are only metaphysical ideas, monastic asceticism, and morals more appropriate to angels. In the experiments at deepening socialism, Flekhanov sees an opium to lull the proletariat to sleep. Mehring sees it as turbid waters in which to catch an unclean fish. Menger does not understand the reason for loud speeches about unneeded lofty philosophical principles when we are facing our own ethics, which overturn every religious foundation and are a guarantee even against the rebirth of religious consciousness. Dietzgen, Dietzgen, I have no idea how to say that properly, long ago proposed to jettison all that is majestic in morality because the special logic of the proletariat delivers us from all philosophical and religious mysticism. Similar thoughts are expressed by Kautsky, Lenin, and Axelrod. We are fed up, says Axelrod, with the boring and monotonous pestering of the critics, teachers, the various perfecters of socialism. It is time for them to cease. To take their path would mean to fall into a dreadful muddle and a demoralization of mind. To take from socialism its living, revolutionary aspect, in other words, its essence, and to replace it again with the reactionary religious character of the whole philosophical mentality. I think that to everyone it is now, now clear that socialism, as a distinct worldview, is in its essence the adversary of all idealism, of all the immutable principles of morality, and the enemy of all religion. Reducing everything in the world to matter, the socialist worldview leaves no space for the divine principle. Such is the theoretical relationship of socialism to religion. In practice, socialists often resort to compromise to gain tactical advantage, which in the language of morality one must call a betrayal of what is true and right. In practice, one has to consider the socialists as having the temper of village peasantry or even the traditional habits of the working class. We cannot even speak of spirituality in other conditions. The class of Christian workers shows the most stubborn opposition to propaganda. One must, of necessity, direct serious attention to religion, as Engels puts it, that greatest of conservative powers. We will never succeed in earning trust if we begin to demand that the government take violent measures against the church, admits Kautsky. What to do? In order to overcome the mistrust of the workers and infiltrate them more quickly in our own ranks, there is arising the aspiration to suppress our fundamental views and, in the name of temporary success, to sacrifice clarity of thought and the sensibilities of our own comrades. This Anton Pannekoek openly and cynically admits. And so we see how socialists adapt. According to the Erfurt program, religion is a personal matter. According to the Workers' Catechism, social democracy demands neither atheism nor theism. Stampfer maintains that the thesis of socialism are concerned neither with God nor the afterlife. It is slander to say that it is the sworn enemy of the church. One can be both Christian and a social democrat. In all these and similar statements, there is absolutely no sincerity. The Erfurt program does not satisfy the more consistent socialist. They demand that an inimical relationship with the church be stressed more emphatically. In actual fact, the socialists are waging war against religion, but in accordance with their tactical ploys, they take refuge behind a personal struggle against clericalists. And this struggle is justified by the fact that the clericalists have pretensions to political power, are fanatics, foster ignorance, and support the capitalist class. Yet all of this is, of course, a mere sham. The socialists are in reality inimical to all religion, are against God. But is not such hypocrisy, such falsehood, immoral, scandalously immoral?
To this, the socialists answer us thus: mere moral means have nothing to recommend them to us. You will not get far in politics with them. In each party, perfidious tricks are unavoidable, and the laws of traditional morality here recede completely into the background. What can you do with party tactics? But these tactics are such as would move Jesuits to ecstasy. The more direct, and if one can speak of honesty among them, honest socialists, however, let the cat out of the bag and openly state their enmity towards religion. On August 22nd, 1901, the French Social Revolutionary Party resolved citizens, the members of the party, vow that under no circumstances will they carry out any religious acts whatever in conjunction with representatives of any denomination. Freedom of conscience. On December 31st, 1878, Bebel, in the presence of the entire Reichstag, declared, in the area of religion, we aspire to atheism. And on September 16th, 1878, he expressed a firm trust that socialism will lead to atheism. This same blasphemer, Bebel, calls himself the enemy of all religion, of which people of high quality have no need. At the Gall Assembly, Liebknecht, Liebknecht expressed the hope that the basic principles of socialism will overcome religious forms of popular ignorance. According to Tott, he who is himself not an atheist and does not commit himself with all zeal to the dissemination of atheism is not fit to be called a socialist. Lafarge is indignant that religious principles are still not utterly extirpated. I know the word, I just can't say it for some reason. Utterly extirpated, even from the minds of the learned, but is comforted by the hope that in the future socialism would completely erase faith in God from men's souls. Certain socialists descry in the distance the first day of socialism, an international celebration of it in the Vatican and St. Peter's Basilica, when the whole religious past will be made the subject of curious conversations and merry jokes, when educational institutions, trade schools, and exhibits of the products of modern industry, not even art, will be housed in the churches, and when the place of religion will be occupied by an amalgamation of all interest in economic solidarity. It is understood that in the socialist worldview, there will also be no place for belief in the immortality of the soul. The denial of immortality is one of the main conditions for the success of socialism. Because with the weakening of belief in heaven, socialist demands for heaven on earth will be strengthened. Deetskin advises that one prefer a comfortable world here to the other world. On February 3rd, 1893, a certain Catholic deputy asked the Social Democrats of the German Reichstag the question as to whether they believed in the afterlife. They answered unanimously in the negative. One socialist newspaper, Noisette, suggested that the threats of hell be mocked and that pointing to heaven be disdained. It is terrible to read the socialist blasphemies against religion in general, yet these blasphemies are even more greatly intensified when they speak of the Christian faith. There was a time of sentimental socialism when it assumed the role of a direct continuer of the commandments of the gospel. At that time, one could encounter in the homes of certain socialist workers an engraving depicting Jesus as a carpenter with the following inscription: Jesus of Nazareth, the first representative of the people. On the feast day of the Nativity of Christ, they would gather at democratic banquets to celebrate his birth. Proudhon himself, despite his anti-clericalism, paid tribute to this fashion, and in his newspaper printed explanations and accounts of these Christian socialist affairs. Goodness, my nose keeps itching. On April 25th, 1848, a committee of Democratic Socialist ladies organized in Valentino Castle a banquet on the day of the Nativity of Christ with paid admission of 1 franc, 50 centimes, 50 centimes for children. Proudhon's newspaper, La People, published the following account. The assembly was opened appropriately with the reading of the Sermon on the Mount. After a song in honor of the brotherhood, sung with great animation, there followed a series of toasts, a list of which we will enumerate. For Christ, the father of socialism, offered by a certain lady whose name we will not cite. For the coming of God to earth, offered by Jean Derun. Our friend Pierre Leroux, who is always prepared to welcome the desires of his brethren and friends, again read and explained the Sermon on the Mount and greeted the coming of a new religion. This impromptu speech was accepted with the most ardent approval. Then followed most toasts. For Christmas, offered by Brazier, Madam, I guess that's Madam Brazier. For Saint Just, the victim of the Thermidor, offered by Hervey. For the resurrection of Christ for France, offered by Berneron. We doubt that such blasphemous banquets would dispose any Christians to favor socialism, but now such affairs are a thing of the past. Now the socialists have but one desire: to debunk Christianity, to undermine trust in its historical principles, to mock the content of its ideals, and to drag even its moral teachings through the mire. Christianity arises from economic conditions and spiritual needs. For the sake of decency, they try to present the case as scientific. At the Mainz conference, the demand was made to provide a scientific refutation of the teachings of Christianity suitable for the purposes of agitation. And so, a filthy and blasphemous caricature of Christianity appears in scholarly literature. Here one does not know what to be more surprised at: the psychological limitations of the authors, their ignorance of history, the backwardness of their point of view from the standpoint of principle, or their dishonesty in distorting the facts and twisting the sense of the texts. In no single area does the science of this socialism, which boasts of its scholarship, bring such shame upon itself as here in its juvenile, perfervid criticism. Perfervid. Oh, okay. There we go. I don't guess I've ever seen that word. I've only heard it before. Perfervid criticism of Christianity. Irrefutable conclusions of science arise among the socialists of Tübingen. Lafargue sees in the Christian faith a systematic amalgamation of ideals and myths which dominated in the ancient world for hundreds of years. For Bebel, the existence of Christ is very uncertain. Christianity borrowed from Egypt, from India, Buddha, Zoroaster, and even from Socrates. Of course, it is of human origin, and its elimination from the point of view of progress is essential. The church is the yoke with which the clergy harnesses the people in the interest of the ruling classes. The dogmatic aspect of Christianity is of no interest to the socialist, who now considers dogmas obligatory. Yet the socialists dare to blaspheme even the moral teachings of Christianity and to propose their own greater. According to this teaching, all morality is conditional. It is immoral only to deviate from one's own morals, and in no case from those of others. The conscience, according to Menger, is only fear of unpleasant consequences for opposing power and what is commonly accepted, and power and morality are in essence identical. Hope in the Messiah is senseless. Christianity has not fulfilled its promises of universal redemption from the needs and cares of existence. But where is the proof that it ever made such promises? To criticize the moral teaching of Christianity, which they do not wish to acknowledge, the socialists do not undertake criticism but prefer to wage war. Christianity is a religion of hatred, persecution, and oppression. Christian charity is explained as a desire to belittle the dignity of the poor and to receive in exchange for a paltry earthly outlay, fabulous, usurious interest in the form of heavenly rewards. Finally, the height of socialist blasphemy, for which may God himself chastise them, is the wild expression of Bax concerning the excess of continual references to the ideal perfection of the half mythical first century Syrian, a blasphemous misreference to Christ. when there are so many higher examples among the ranks of the modern socialist movement? May God deliver us from these higher examples. The perfection of the modern socialist movement is not in Christian life on earth, nor in eternal blessedness in heaven. Both the former and the latter are relegated to the archives. Our ideal is not poverty nor abstinence, but wealth, and wealth immeasurable, unheard of. This wealth is the good of all humanity, its holy object, its holy of holies, toward the possession of which all our hopes are directed. But enough of these mindless words. I hope my readers will forgive me for setting down these blasphemies of the socialists and offending their Christian sensibilities with them. I have only wanted to show what moral ugliness socialism is and what an abysmal of falsehood lies within, and therefore how mistaken it is any attempt to reconcile socialism and the divine Christian faith. Such attempts are being made not only by Christians who have lost their faith, who have changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like the corruptible man, in birds and four footed beasts and creeping things. Certain among the socialists, or better to say, workers seduced by socialism, are also naively convinced that it is possible to combine socialism and Christianity. The socialist press is also trying to take advantage of this trust, arguing that Christ belongs not to the churchmen, but to the socialists. Oscar Zimmer, in his booklet, The Socialist from Nazareth, reaches the conclusion that all the religious teaching of Christ was a mere addendum to his preaching of socialism, in the opinion to another author. Christ unfortunately could not fulfill his most important task to write a manual of political economics, but the modern lights of socialism have brilliantly carried out this task. All of these attempts at reconciling socialism and Christianity, whichever side makes them, do not satisfy present day socialists in the least. The real convictions of the socialists are expressed by Bebel and Vandervelde. Christianity and socialism strive for different things. They are as opposite as fire and water. If one could conceive the full satanic evil of socialism, which is expressed in the socialist's own words, one's heart would die of horror. In 1908, the magazine The Christian appended the book of Amelia Gregoriovius, Heaven on Earth. The book produced a deep impression. It depicted socialism as a horrible monster in the form of a mockery of God. Just such an impression is produced by our familiarization with the relationship of socialism to our Holy of Holies, the Christian faith. Socialism is the mystery of iniquity, which the Holy Apostle Paul prophesied. Is there any need to refute socialism? No, it is sufficient merely to say what socialism is, and those who have still kept their faith in Christ to any degree will reject this ungodly scandal with horror. The believing man is absolutely unable to speak of any agreement between socialism and Christianity whatever. Socialism is not only not ours, it is our declared and dangerous adversary. It is guilty of enmity toward Christianity and deserves no condescension. It is our enemy. Every member of the church must be aware of this, and it is essential that the church explain this for all the world to hear. If passing into heresy entails separation from the church, passing into socialism is an error more grievous than any heresy, and is even more deserving of punishment. If any man love not the Lord Jesus Christ, let him be anathema. We have already seen how socialism loves Jesus Christ. It is necessary to commit all inveterated, inveterate socialism to anathema. Ravening wolves must be driven from the flock, else the whole flock will perish. Excuse me. How can one speak of the Christianization of socialism? These are empty words. Can one Christianize atheism? Christian socialism is a contradiction in terms. What is Christian cannot be socialist. If we do not loudly and openly declare that socialism is the enemy of Christianity, nothing will result except harm and scandal. All compromises are inappropriate here. One must look one's enemy in the eye. To underestimate danger is always deleterious. taken from Orthodox Life, May to June 1998 issue, pages 35 through 44. All right. So that is the teaching of Saint Hilarion of Troitsky on socialism versus Christianity. I think it's very interesting that still to this day, these same arguments are attempted by those that claim socialism is Christianity, that socialism is the Christian form of politics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yet in biblical text, there's never mention of a socialist style government. But anyway, so that is the episode for today. I hope y'all enjoyed all this, got something out of it. I need water now and I need lunch. So I'm going to stop right here.